The light is literally flashing on my microphone, which is giving me some anxiety. I want to start this Moody Monday today off with a shout out to actually another podcast that I'm a super fan of, and it's called Stuff You Should Know. If you don't know it, it's a podcast where hosts Josh Clark and Chuck Bryant basically research different stuff every week and find out what makes it worth knowing about. And I don't know if anybody else gets this, but I assume some of you do. Basically, recently I've been having this scary thought about how when I have kids one day and one of them asks me, Mom, what makes ocean water salty? Or why do snails have shells? I won't be able to give them an answer. I'll be like, wait a minute, let me just Google it and I'll just get back to you. Or even worse, I'll just give them some bogus made up answer, which they will then repeat to their friends, who will then laugh at them, and then they'll cry, and then all of their childhood trauma will begin from right there. You know? Anyway, so basically, I've been thinking about just how fucking stupid I feel sometimes. Someone could ask me, how was a watch made? And I would be like, don't know. Who invented cars? Don't know. 352 minus 65? Don't know. And instead of this getting better, I swear it's actually getting worse and worse over time. And that's not even an exaggeration. It is getting worse. My mind is forgetting information that I once knew for sure. Like that's what happens with aging. So I want to say a few years ago, but in actual fact, it's probably been around 5 or 6 years now since I got into watching YouTube videos. And when I say YouTube videos, I mean a very specific kind of YouTube video, and that is vloggers vlogging. I know some of you listening right now might be going, what's a vlogger? Fair question. For those of you who do not know what a vlogger is basically a video blogger. It's a sort of open format for content creators to make videos about whatever. Like there's exercise vloggers, there's motivational vloggers, there's daily routine vloggers, there's I don't know, all kinds of vloggers, right? And it's not actually vloggers that I want to talk about. It's more the way that vloggers became the catalyst of today's topic on Moody Monday, the midst of social media that we're in right now with, influencers, vloggers, celebrities, you name them, who are all sort of creating this content that has a lot to do with self-help or confessional videos, how I've been feeling recently. Like this is a title that you will often see on YouTube from vloggers, like why I haven't been posting online recently. And then it's like a video where they have a meltdown and cry on screen. And, it's supposed to sort of give us this rawness, this vulnerability, this humanism to our big brother lives. And yeah, I'm intrigued. There is something about that intrigues me, basically because I'm a voyeur. I'm not proud to admit that, but I just am a voyeur. I always have been. It's kind of maybe even a crucial aspect of being a photographer, wanting to make movies, stuff like that. I don't know. The jury on that one is out. I wonder if any other photographers or people who are video makers, filmmakers could agree with me there. But yeah, there's an aspect of this confessional video glimpse into another person's life that I'm super intrigued by. And I think because another part of it also comes from the fact that I've just been journaling and having a diary since I was really quite young. And I kept that up for a really, really long time. And I still do journal occasionally. Honestly, I do often feel like I don't journal when I'm not going through a hard time. Most of the time, my journaling amps up as soon as there's something not great going on in my life and I feel like I need to get thoughts out. My journaling is often akin to emotional diarrhea on paper that nobody else needs to see, and I never even read afterwards myself. It's literally just like a vent that I put things down on paper and then rarely, if ever, look back at. Each their own. I know people are way more constructive with their journaling, and I know that there's way more constructive ways to journal, but that's sort of been my approach for forever, basically. So yeah, that's sort of some of the reasons why I've been drawn into these vlogs. in the past. And I want to kind of go back to the content of these vlogs themselves and something that I've been seeing a lot and hearing a lot of, and it's this word anxiety. A lot, and I mean a lot of people out there on the interwebs seem like they are struggling with the same thing, which is anxiety. As someone who suffered from anxiety disorder and panic attacks for a good portion of my late teens to early 20s, I want to really take the time to discuss in this episode the topic of how anxiety really works, how it develops, and how it differs from, say, regular stress and nervousness. So, when it comes to anxiety, I think it's really important to see it as a natural response to stress, which is often, characterized by feelings of worry or fear and has physical sensations applicable to it, like increased heart rate. Anxiety basically becomes a mental health issue when these feelings that you're experiencing are persisting for a long time and begin to really disrupt your daily life. One key definition that characterizes anxiety is a fear of unknown future events that one feels unable to control. This can include worry about potential negative outcomes, uncertainties, or hypothetical situations. Really, it's this anticipation of future threats or dangers, whether they are real or imagined, which is the key aspect of anxiety and essentially how it differentiates from other emotions like stress and nervousness, which are more tied up to immediate situations. When it comes to anxiety disorders, and having anxiety, the particulars of what causes each person's anxiety varies. For me, when my anxiety really was at its peak, I remember waking up, and as soon as that, sleepy haze had settled down, I would almost instantly get this huge wave which would wash over me. And the best way that I could describe this wave is like a electrical current that would wash over my body. And right after it had washed itself all over my body, it would then sort of accumulate and live on top of my chest, I would say. Like I was going to say in my chest, but really the feeling was more like it was somewhere on top of my chest, but I could never like do anything to just sort of rip it off and get it away. Actually, I described this whole thing to my counselor one time, and I said the feeling that I had was that there was some sort of like as though there was a protective armor that should be there and that everybody else seems to have, but mine had somehow been ripped off, which consequently meant that I was walking around feeling like I was bearing this open wound to the world. And looking back now, I guess the feeling I was trying to describe was really just a feeling of an intense vulnerability or like a sensitivity to life and to, my surroundings basically. But it was definitely like I was missing like a filter that is needed in order to be able to get through your day. Like there's no way that as soon as I live at an undisclosed location somewhere in Neukölln. If you are a Berliner and if you're from Berlin and you've been to Neukölln, you know that it can get quite intense outside or on the U-Bahn. But when you're like walking around and you sort of feel like you're missing this filter that you really need in order to get through your day, it can be really tough. So yeah, basically this was the general and persistent mental state that I lived in for, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years, intensely. And at the peak of my anxiety, I also experienced some pretty severe panic attacks, which if you've never had a panic attack, I don't want to say good for you because I honestly do not wish a panic attack on anyone. They are literally the worst thing ever. And because basically they come on in minutes and are just super debilitating. Like you start experiencing basically it feels like being completely engulfed all of a sudden in a gigantic fear around something that is just always slightly out of your reach and out of your comprehension. And you are just completely paralyzed in this absolute state of fear. Honestly, it's fucking awful. I remember my anxiety actually getting so bad at one point, and I even actually became envious of people who suffer from depression because I incorrectly at that time felt like people who were depressed couldn't feel or had trouble feeling, while I, with my anxiety, felt like I was having the exact polar opposite experience. And it was so bad that it made me wish I could jump mental health ships. Side note, if you ever find yourself wishing you could suffer from depression instead of anxiety because it feels like it would be at least some form of relief, that's the point when you know you have a real problem, you know? Okay, so then how do you actually diagnose a person who has anxiety disorder? Basically, you have to reach a state where your feelings of worry and fear are so excessive and are persisting long enough over time and interfere with your daily life and your functioning. Anxiety disorders are usually then categorized into various types of anxiety disorders, and the main ones are generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and social anxiety disorder. They're all very serious conditions and often will require professional intervention and treatment. So, then how can a person know whether they're suffering from anxiety or whether what they're going through is more a result of stress? Stress is the body's response to a demand or a challenge. Stress can be triggered by various events or thoughts that make an individual feel frustrated or angry, nervous, or even anxious. So stress can be acute, meaning, short term, or chronic, meaning long term, and it can affect both mental and physical health. The body's response to stress involves the activation of the fight or flight response, very primal response in all human beings that basically is there in all of us in order to save our lives. So it's a natural and a very good and positive response. And while stress is a natural and sometimes beneficial response to many things, when it becomes a chronic stress is when it can lead to significant health issues. So basically, stress is what can cause anxiety, and chronic stress in particular is what can cause anxiety disorders to form. I keep checking. It's so ironic, really, but I'm not even making this up, that the microphone that I'm using, the battery of it is not fully charged and it's in that mode where the light is flickering on and off. And I keep having to turn the microphone around to check whether it's still on. So, yeah, speaking of the difference between stress and anxiety, when someone is under stress, their body and their mind respond with various symptoms. And if the stress is prolonged or intense, it can lead to anxiety disorders or frequent episodes of nervousness. But until it tips over to that point, it still remains a stress that you're experiencing. And I get that maybe some of this feels or seems pretty basic, understanding nervousness and the differences between nervousness, stress, anxiety, but it isn't all that clear. And what's happening is that a lot of these different things are being bundled under one umbrella term, which is anxiety. So for me, as a person who did struggle for many years and was diagnosed with having an anxiety disorder, it is important to be able to understand the differences so that you can diagnose those who have proper anxiety disorders from other disorders, and also not to misuse certain mental health issues and illnesses, particularly when you are addressing a larger group of people over the internet and social media. A distinction, therefore, to be made about nervousness is that nervousness is a very temporary emotional state, which is often a response to specific situations like public speaking, or you're about to take a test, or you're about to have a meeting with some new people. Common symptoms of being nervous can be things like, having a racing heart or sweating, trembling, or even nausea, or having an upset stomach is like a classic response to feeling nervous about something. I mean, a lot of musicians and performers will talk about having the runs before a show. Or I remember going on a date with a guy. It wasn't even a date. I was going to meet up with a guy for some drinks one time, and I thought this guy was super cute, and I was so nervous before going to meet up with him that I felt nauseous, and I felt so nauseous. I was trying to like have some pre-drinks in order to settle my nerves, and I could hardly even drink the bloody drinks because I was just feeling so nauseous all the time. Like, it was, I really look back on that moment actually now that I'm talking about it, and I'm just like, oh, like, if you could go back in time, I don't know what I would say to that girl, but I would definitely say that guy was 1000% not worth that nausea. I mean, maybe he was not worth the nausea in certain ways because he was not worth it, but not in the way that it made you feel, which was just not equal to someone and afraid that this person was not going to like you enough. So basically, nervousness, and even in that situation with that guy, I wasn't experiencing anxiety. I was actually just nervous because nervousness is usually a short lived response to a trigger in a situation that will soon pass. And anxiety is typically associated with the longevity of a particular feeling or a response. There's actually a great book that my counselor recommended that I read back then called Living with It: A Survivor's Guide to Overcoming Panic and Anxiety. The author is actually an Australian author by the name of Bev. Oh my God, I'm gonna murder. I can't believe she's an Australian author. I'm just horrible at pronouncing people's names. I want to say this is definitely not how you pronounce her surname, but I want to pronounce it Aspet. It's Aisbett. So Aspet, honestly. Anyway, she made a book that is basically like a practical guide designed to help individuals understand and manage panic attacks and anxiety. And it sort of combines this humor and illustration with this straightforward advice to demystify panic attacks and provide readers with the tools, that they need to cope and overcome them. One of the key aspects to the book is something that I think is really interesting, and it's the idea that while anxiety might not be something you can completely eliminate from your life, you can learn effective strategies to manage and cope with it. The weird thing though is it was the similarity that I saw with anxiety disorder and addiction that really stuck with me. So I read this book a really, really long time ago now. And it's funny that that's sort of what stuck with me over everything. What I mean by the similarity between anxiety disorder and addiction is an addict is never not an addict, right? They're just clean, meaning that they don't, use anymore, or they still do. And I always felt this way about being a smoker, for example. I haven't been a smoker now for many years, and I'll never forget how my granddad, he started smoking when he was 7 or something, and I'm not even joking. He was from an extremely poor family. He later joined the partisans during the Second World War and then the army, and he smoked all the way up until he was 50, I think 50 or 60. No, I think 50 because he passed away when he was 70 something. The reason why he quit was because he coughed up blood one day, and then that was it for him. He just never had a single cigarette again. But he said that every single day that went by, he could have lit up like no time had passed at all. And honestly, that's a bit how I feel too. And I mean that in the sense that when you were addicted to something, to a substance, it's like at the end of the day, a choice that you're making. You're choosing not to do this thing anymore. And there's certain things that contribute to make it easier. For example, the physical addiction diminishes over time when it comes to nicotine, for example. But there's many different occasions where you think to yourself, I really could have a cigarette right now and I think I would enjoy it, but you just decide not to because of ... But it's wild, I still think, the idea of anxiety disorder being a disease and one that you can't ever actually cure yourself completely from. You can just learn how to manage it and learn how to live with it, hence the title of the book. I still don't know if I completely agree with this or not when it comes to anxiety disorder, but, and I guess this is a bit of a bonus round of today's Moody Monday where I slip into completely unverified theories, which basically means take all of this with a grain of salt, right? Also, I am not a professionally trained psychologist in any way, shape, or form, but there are some theories out there that anxiety disorder can actually be contagious, not unlike the common cold or flu, which could explain why anxiety disorders affect around 18% of the population in the United States annually. I think in Germany, that statistic is slightly lower. Like in Germany, 14% of Germans are diagnosed with anxiety disorders yearly, making essentially anxiety disorders the most prevalent mental disorders that have collectively affected more people than any other mental health condition. Depression and depressive disorders come in at number 2, with approximately 7% of all adults in the United States experiencing major depressive disorders each year. But I mean, why not? Like, I mean, it is called mental illness after all. Why should contagiousness only apply to illnesses that we can catch physically? I definitely know that I've been around anxious people before who have triggered off my own anxiety, and that at other times I've been around anxious people who I almost feel like could never trigger off my personal strain of anxiety. It's like the genetic composition or something of my anxiety and what it's made up from is just different to theirs, while others I'm not immune at all to. Super weird, but it's kind of true for me. I don't know. I want to end things today on a slightly lighter note. I got on TikTok recently and I'm actually kind of a late joiner to TikTok, but whatever. I was scrolling TikTok the other night, and recently I've sort of been getting a bunch of stand-up comedians coming up on my feed, which I'm not mad about. Anyway, so I was watching this one comedian do a skit where he's saying how he was talking to a friend and the friend was telling him how he's really worried that he's not going to be able to make rent this month, and that is giving him so much anxiety. So the comedian asks his friend, will you be able to make rent? And his friend answers, no. So he says, then you don't have anything to worry about if you know you won't make rent. You're not anxious, you're just poor. As an anxious person in recovery, these days I almost feel like anxiety has become this hype word. I don't know if hype word is the right phrase to use, but the term anxiety is just being so overused. Everyone is anxious. Everyone is quote unquote being given anxiety from this or that or the other. So I guess to close things off, I'm not trying to shame anyone or discredit them, but as a person who once had severe anxiety disorder and who has been in recovery for a really long time, I just feel like it's important these days to understand mental health more and also respect it. And that's all. Moody Monday, every Monday with a moody new topic. Lots of love.